Hello, and welcome to Alta Live. This is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Magazine. I am so happy to see you as you join our Zoom room, joining today's discussion on Death Valley, the folks who flock there, pulled by the allure of its sky-high temperatures and overall weirdness. But is Death Valley so strange after all? We're going to talk about that with journalist Chris Colin. His article in Alta Journal, Living with Death Valley, is the impetus for today's conversation. Chris, if you're unfamiliar with him, his work has appeared in The New Yorker, Wired, and the Best American Science and Nature Writing. He produces the podcast Longer Tables with Jose Andres and is the author most recently of Off, The Day the Internet Died. I hope that doesn't happen during the next 30 minutes. First, some brief housekeeping. As I mentioned, Alta Live is a digital interview series we do here every Wednesday. The idea is to expand upon a subject from the magazine, like Chris's article, an author of a book we review, or something related to our current issue, which is we're calling this the desert issue. It's all about the desert. If you're interested in Death Valley, you will be interested in 90% of this magazine, I guarantee it, off the bat. If you're unfamiliar with our magazine, we're an award-winning quarterly journal focused on California and the West. You can join Alta for as little as $3 a month and support the work we do, including a monthly California book club, which is free and very fun to join. Weekly events like this one. If you haven't yet joined Alta as a member, to get our quarterly magazine, you get a hat, you get a book. I really encourage you to consider joining us and look into it. We'll send you a link on where to do that, but we welcome you into the Alta community. All right, on to today. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions for Chris. We will chat for about 30 minutes and get to as many of your questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. We're going to send you a link to that, a link to Chris's article, a link to anything else that comes up in this conversation today. So scan your email for that later. With that, it is awesome to be here with our Alta Live community today. Let us know where you're zooming in from in the chat. It's always fun to see. Chris, I am in Nevada, California. Where are you?
Hi, I am in San Francisco, California.
Not so hot in San Francisco.
Never.
Can you let's just start by talking about Death Valley, as I have never been to Death Valley, and I haven't been there. The opportunity hasn't arisen really, but then I find the name scary. Your article is really a fun read and kind of amusingly talks about the allure of danger and death to Death Valley. Can you explain that a little bit? Why do people find Death Valley so exciting?
It's meant to scare you, Beth. That's the whole, that was by design. All right, I'm going to back up many hundreds of years very briefly and say that it wasn't always the place that you're picturing right now, this sort of thrillingly forbidding realm where you might or might not meet some calamitous end. For hundreds of years, the Timbisha Shoshone lived there just fine, and they didn't need to be all dramatic about what they called the place. It was just where they lived, and that was that. And then in 1849, everything changes. Because that's when a group of prospectors decided to try to take this shortcut to go to, whatever they thought was their destination. Never take a shortcut.
Never take a shortcut.
If only we had been there to tell them. They get lost, some group of them gets lost, stagger around this terrible, hot, waterless desert for months. Months. And I do believe that one of them did die. I don't mean to make entirely light of what happened. But what the famous moment comes at the end when they finally make their way out. And this was, the 19th century. Everyone has sort of a flair for the dramatic back then. And as they're leaving, they look back at this, place they've just crossed, and one of them says, "Goodbye, Death Valley." And the name didn't just stick, it lit people up. Everyone went crazy. They started calling it Death Valley. And even though, like I said, only one person had died, and I think they were already sick to begin with, it became this this legendary place that could kill you. And of course, once you hear that, you just have to see it. So that was 1849, and from then on, the myth just grew and grew and grew and grew. And every possible way that a place can be forbidding and terrifying, was amplified. There's all these superlatives about the place that are real. You really can find the hottest temperature on Earth. You really can find the lowest point on Earth. It really is unbelievably vast and secluded. That stuff is real. But what has been exaggerated greatly is the risk. And that's sort of what I wrote about in this story.
Because there are other places. Can you kind of name some other places? I realize that it is the hottest place on Earth. It's the lowest. It's the biggest national park within we don't count Alaska. No, very few people count Alaska. But are there other locations where people can experience this level of heat if you really wanted to?
Well,
if you're a temperature tourist and you're like, I really want to feel 130 degrees.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we'll get to that. I'm going to say I have a whole lot to say about that, but since you mentioned temperature tourists, that's what really attracted me to Death Valley. Is I'd heard about these people who fly in from all around the world, not in the sort of cooler months when you would think you'd want to have a vacation in Death Valley, but they go at the height of summer. The world record for the hottest place anywhere, I believe, is still 134 degrees in Death Valley. And people come from all over Europe and China. I'm trying to think of what the big ones are that send folks there, but it's a hugely popular destination for these temperature tourists who want to see what the world is capable of. They've heard of this dramatic place. And what really grabbed me about them is that their favorite spot is not necessarily Zabriskie Point, this beautiful viewpoint, or Badwater Basin. It's the visitor center, the Furnace Creek Visitor Center, because hanging outside the visitor center is a thermometer, and they line up to take pictures, standing next to the thermometer, showing that they were there and they survived, probably not 134 degrees, but it gets up there.
It's almost like when you see a celebrity in public, the instinct to take a selfie to prove the encounter has happened. It totally is the kind of celebrity temperature of the world, Death Valley temperature. Plus, it's so beautiful. I mean, the branding, despite the haggard people who've survived months in the desert saying goodbye forever, Death Valley, the branding is incredible. Some of the names that you mentioned, Badwater Basin, but then there's Tea Kettle Junction with the sign that says Tea Kettle Junction, and there's a bunch of tea kettles hanging from it. The Racetrack Playa, which is home to those sailing stones, the stones that mysteriously, although there is an explanation on the Death Valley website, roll along. So the
Ubehebe Crater. You got to say Ubehebe Crater as much as you can. That's a fun one to say.
I didn't add it because I didn't know how to pronounce it.
I might be getting it wrong, but I believe it's Ubehebe. It's a volcanic crater right there in the park.
So there's a number of these kind of badass experiences that one could achieve in Death Valley. But does Death Valley, I guess, as you allude to in your article, kind of serve as a cultural proxy for bigger, more challenging concepts?
I think, this is just my personal little theory, but I feel like Death Valley has become, because of all that sort of lure about the place, it really became a place where you could, it became a dare, like the embodiment of a dare. It became a sort of siren song for people who wanted to see how tough they were. They wanted to have their mettle tested, and they wanted to see what planet Earth was capable of. And, it's a totally understandable thing. You want to go see the most extreme place that has been discovered so far and see how you do. It's sort of like when you're a kid and you want to run your hand over a candle flame. I certainly get it. But I also think it's an interesting moment to sort of be revisiting that instinct now that extreme weather doesn't and extreme climate doesn't just happen in these little isolated spots, but it's coming for us.
So how do we, what, I mean, what do you mean when you say that we should be kind of reevaluating that?
Well, I think that when you treat a place like an extreme sport, to sort of conquer it, like, can I handle Death Valley? And there's a lot of, when you go looking for sort of travel packages around Death Valley, a lot of them sort of couch it that way. Like, do you dare come to Death Valley? Yeah, to my mind, it was sort of treating it like an extreme sport. And I feel like it sort of others the desert in a way. It others nature, treats it like an opponent. It separates us from it, which I think is sort of maybe not what we should be aiming for in 2023, when we don't always have such a harmonious relationship with nature.
What should we be aiming for with Death Valley?
Oh God, I was afraid you'd ask me that.
Well,
I think that yes, it is like really intense, but it's also just beautiful. There's a quieter beauty lurking beneath the sort of what one source told me called the charismatic temperatures. It's beneath the superlatives. There's just like something sort of quieter, but really mind-blowing. I popped my brain like 40 times on that last trip. The sort of psychedelic time signature, the way everything slows down, the colors are so otherworldly. There's a real beautiful eeriness to the place. And I just think if you, even without the crazy temperatures and the, all the sort of dares, am I going to survive? It's a really strange and lovely place to spend time.
but without those superlatives,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going to lose the selfie people by the thermometer. It becomes another national park, and without death in the name. What differentiates it then from Yosemite, which is a humongous draw, or any other, Yellowstone, etc. If it doesn't have that, I'm just playing devil's advocate, but
Yeah.
if it doesn't have that, holy smokes, you're probably going to drop dead. Are you tough enough to handle this? And I suspect that it might lose, or maybe that's a good thing, a lot of attendance.
Well,
a lot of popularity, a lot of Instagrammability.
Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
People can go see other national parks. But I will say there's plenty to recommend it, even without that element. One thing that Death Valley and the surrounding area has is interesting characters. One who's sadly no longer with us was this guy, Walter Scott, who is just a classic great Depression era con man, huckster. And he built this place. If you've been to Death Valley, you've probably seen or at least heard about Scotty's Castle, which is this wonderful, not really a castle. It's a mission revival, Spanish colonial revival mansion in the northern part of Death Valley that this huckster, somehow managed to get built because he convinced people he had discovered gold mines there. And you can tour this place, and it's beautiful. Really makes you want to grow up and be a huckster.
What is a huckster? What is that?
A con man. He was like a storyteller. He's a grifter. He told tales and got people to invest in his various non-existent schemes. But I think there's a lot of, I think, I'm not saying Death Valley is full of con people. Characters. Yeah. It's full of people who, I think it attracts people who want to live a life of their own design, off the grid, and off the sort of societal grid, in general.
Which is, you got to be a little bit wacky, or maybe a little bit genius, a wacky genius to begin with. There's actually a lot of that in the current issue, these kind of characters of that. Ken Lane and his Desert Oracle being an example, the Lost Dutchman's Mine. So anyway, I get your theory about characters. There's also some, there's kind of some spooky mysteries. There's the case that the way the Death Valley got its name, as you referenced, these kind of these agonizing survival stories where people who may or may not have had pre-existing conditions have walked into the desert and died. It is admittedly dangerous. You can look up right now the list of people who are currently missing in Death Valley. You're right. I'm sorry?
You're right. I have to quickly interrupt you to hasten to amend what I said. You can get into some serious trouble there. I don't
definitely die in Death Valley.
You can die if you're not careful, you can die. That is an option. You do have to go prepared. And I did do that. I mean, I was over prepared. I brought 9 million bottles of water. Probably looked a little silly. But yeah, you do have to have your head screwed on straight when you make a trip there.
And I noticed on the Death Valley website, there's a list of what not to do. And the big one, at least that seems to me, both according to the government, the Secretary of the Interior, as well as just all of the horror stories of people who go missing and their skeletons are found years later, is don't go off-road. Stay on the roads. Don't drive your car. Don't go off.
No shortcuts.
No shortcuts.
Yeah, but even on the road, okay, now I'm reversing my entire position, saying it is dangerous. Even on the road, if you're not careful, your tires can overheat and pop because the road is so hot. So that is one thing that happens. People get flat tires, and then they decide to go walking in search of help, and that's when things start to cascade in the wrong direction.
It seems like when you look at a map of Death Valley, there seems to be, as you mentioned, the visitor center is spot number one because you can pose with the thermometer and have your selfie moment. There's Scotty's Castle. There's I think it's the racetrack playa where you can see the stones rolling. There's a number of Star Wars movies, I believe, have used Death Valley and other Star Trek, other kind of desert set movies. We have a movie recap, a desert music videos recap in our magazine. But in addition to those sites, I know people camp there, they hike there in these really extreme conditions. Are there degrees of temperature tourists? Do you get kind of more, I don't want to say street cred or desert cred, but the more extreme you go? I know that you can do sand dune surfing at certain spots in Death Valley. Can you be I'm just going to go on a really hot day and take my temperature and then go back to the Four Seasons and relax kind of temperature tourists versus camping for a month in the wilderness?
Yep. You can, there is a spectrum. I reject the idea of cred. I think any kind of tourism is fine as long as you're not hurting anybody or yourself. But no, it's true. You can be one of these people who's on the air-conditioned tour bus. You scamper off to pose with the thermometer, and then you get back on, then you go to your hotel. Fine. But you can also take it quite a bit further. You can go on some pretty intense hikes. You can camp. You can, there's canyons and dunes. There's a super bloom of wildflowers every 10 years or so. Zabriskie Point, there's some places that are very accessible, but also incredibly stupendous. Zabriskie Point is probably one of the most famous spots. It's famous for watching the sunrise, and it really is. It will knock your socks off. Or you can drop acid there, like the philosopher Michel Foucault did in the 70s, I guess it was. 10 hours of dropping acid and listening to Strauss on the floor of the desert there, which I really am sorry I couldn't see a extended video of that.
You could still do it. You could leave that.
Could do.
Is there something, I mean, I'm specifically thinking of, I guess, the tourists that show up, take their picture, hop on the air-conditioned tour bus and bounce. Is there something that you hope they take away, I guess? Is there something that we can all, I would be one of those tourists, admittedly. So I'm in representation of those people, something that we should be taking away from Death Valley. I mean, other than your point about the otherness, that the desert is not something that is like an extreme sport that's, not a joke, but a one-off, an activity. It's like going to the top of the Eiffel Tower and coming back down. Is there a larger picture in terms of like, when we go home, what should we be taking away from our experience of death, the extremes of Death Valley, especially as those come closer and closer to home, to our home?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, well, as you say, I do think they are coming close to home, and maybe some of that, the appeal of just, checking that item off our list will diminish as extreme climate comes, goes further and further beyond Death Valley like places and starts affecting all of us in one way or another. But yeah, I would say that there's another way to really enjoy the place, that, at least for me, which is, our lives are so jam-packed. Every minute, it seems, we're such a busy species. We're always looking at our phones. We're always working. We're always streaming the latest prestige television show. We're always texting someone. We're always behind on email. We're always doing God knows what. It's vanishingly rare to find a moment of stillness, and I think Death Valley is really striking for the specific flavor of stillness you get there. And yes, you could go to any national park and you can cycle down a bit and find some quiet, of course, but the flavor that you find at Death Valley is so otherworldly and strange that it really it sort of knocks you on the head, and you can't help but change channels a little bit. So that I think becomes increasingly more compelling in the years ahead as the rest of our lives become utterly saturated.
If someone does not make a hot sauce called the flavor of Death Valley, there is a very missed opportunity. Jose Andres, perhaps, if you wanted to bring that up for the podcast.
I'll mention it.
So I also kind of discovered your article piqued my interest in kind of like, Death Valley, I could be badass and go to Death Valley too. But there are some interesting night activities. I noticed the Dark Sky Festival. Do you know what that is? It seems to be returning this year. And if anyone's going to be in Death Valley, it's February 10th through 12th. So it's in 2 weeks. It's right around that. Not even. It's in 10 days.
Yes, I recommend it. I mean, they have dark skies every night, believe it or not. But yes, that's an annual festival. The stargazing really is astonishing. I mean, I know that's not going to surprise anyone, but it's just, when you get there, you really haven't seen anything like it. There's no light pollution anywhere around, and you think you've seen stars, but these are stars.
And I guess unlike places like Sierra or Yosemite, there's no gigantic trees or anything. I mean, you're in the middle of the desert. You just look up and it's the universe.
You look up and it's the universe. And also, shout out to the National Park Service for really being on top of the whole light pollution thing over the last however many years. They've been really active on preserving darkness.
Do you, when you talk about this, the specific flavor of Death Valley, which I love, and I think is article number 2, and these characters, the people that might be drawn to this area, the types of characters, the types of personalities that might seek out that flavor, there are kind of weird happenings in Death Valley. Alien sightings aside, there's many mysterious disappearances. There's rumors of illicit drug manufacturing out there. In fact, I was reading about missing people who were spotted only because a helicopter was out looking for people making drugs in the middle of the desert, and they found a group of 3 women who became stranded. Is part of the allure, do you think, just the kind of the weirdness of it all? Death Valley, perhaps it's the lore, seems to have a weird, in addition to that kind of scary death thing, just a weird, like, unsolved mysteries vibe. Is that part of the lore as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people get weird when they're dropped in the middle of nowhere. I think society keeps us from being fully weird. But I think, spend a few days out there, with, what is it, 3.4 million acres. I should know that off the top of my head. 3.4 million acres of nothingness around you. And yeah, I think you sort of, you're whatever innate weirdness you have been stifling all those years starts to come out. And so I think that the net result of that is you start to meet this, sort of community scattered here and there in the hills, and in the canyons and so forth, who are just like, who have been there for sometimes many, many, many years, and they have blossomed in their weirdness. I say that lovingly, weirdos out there.
I would love to blossom in my weirdness.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like my last question for you is probably a tough one. But how do you see Death Valley as a destination, not as a place for any of us to move or live necessarily, but as a destination, both for temperature tourists, as a kind of touchstone of the Southwest, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years? What does Death Valley look like? And will there be, in 100 years, Death Valley's equivalents all over the place due to the climate crisis?
Beth, I don't know what's happening in a week from now, but I'll take a guess. Okay. I mean, I think that from everything I've read, it's only going to become more, the extremes are going to get more extreme, of course. I don't know. I think that, the desert is always changing. We think of it in our sort of basic imagination of deserts. I think we think of it as a stable, unchanging place, but there are ecologies there, of course, that are complex and always evolving. So I don't know. I think it could look a little different. It moves in slow motion, the changes, but it could look a little different. One thing I like about Californians going to Death Valley is it's here in California. You don't have to, speaking of climate change, I dutifully must make a case for not flying quite as much as we used to in years past. So if we can, be dazzled in our own backyard, I think that's
interesting. You're making a case for visiting Death Valley as opposed to flying all over the world and emitting carbons everywhere.
Exactly. It is. Yes. I think that.
Well, how do we get
aspire to that, even if we don't nail it? Sorry?
How do you get to Death Valley? I'm in the Bay Area.
You walk. You have to walk. You walk wherever you are. You have to walk there.
We'll forget it.
No, I will allow you to fly there, but it's still closer than flying to, other
Where
countries.
do you fly to if you're going to, what is their Death Valley International Airport? Where do you fly into?
Where did I fly into?
It looks on a map, it looks kind of like in between, like equidistant from Vegas to Fresno.
Yeah, I think most people fly into Vegas. I think it's about an hour from there, as I recall. And if you want to do a tour, a lot of the tour guides are based in Vegas. I think that's probably the easiest way to go.
And if I was going to go, if rookie Death Valley Beth was going to go without getting lost, I want no helicopter involvement. What's kind of your perfect day? In addition to, I get there, I get my selfie with the thermometer. Then what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I do think with Death Valley, hitting the sort of the big marquee attractions, actually, there's something to be said for that. I mean, other kinds of trips, you might want to avoid the tourist traps. But in this case, I think the famous ones are actually really worth a stop. Badwater Basin, it really is striking. It's the lowest spot on Earth. Dante's View, it's one of the best viewpoints, and yes, there's plenty of tourists there, but it really is amazing. You stand up looking out over the expanse of Death Valley and the road running to Badwater Basin. Scotty's Castle is just rad. You should just do that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that cool?
Well, yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
Stand by that.
Adding it to the list. Okay.
Yeah. I never got to do this, but I know of an opera house, a little teeny little opera house. Speaking of people doing interesting, weird things in the desert. Of course, I'm blanking on the name of it, but if you Google Death Valley Opera House, it'll come right up. But yeah, this is an opera house that a dancer opened many, many years ago. And I think they're starting to reopen.
Margosa Opera House.
That's the one. I think you just sort of like, you talk to people and you find out what's cooking. You just ask like, what's your favorite thing here? And you'll get some good tips. And then there is a place you can stay, you can camp, which is awesome. And then you will get your cred, Beth, but you can also stay in.
I don't need it. I'm good.
You can stay in the hotel. I think the hotel split into 2 hotels there. The 4 Diamond Inn at Death Valley and the Ranch at Death Valley, I think they're called. Shout out to them. But yeah, it's very, you can do it. Anyone can do it. You don't have to be, Edmund Hillary to do this trip.
Look what happened to him.
Look what happened to him.
On that cheery note, this has been fascinating. I think I'm slightly more convinced that I would like to see and experience Death Valley, especially the flavor, the weird flavor, to let my weirdness blossom, as a number of people have pointed out, is a fabulous phrase. I also like your idea to just arrive at Death Valley and ask people without irony, what's cooking, which I think is brilliant. So with that, Chris Colin, I am so very grateful. It's so fun talking to you. I hope we get to talk more, write more for Alta, and we'll do more of these. It's
back at you. Thank you for having me.
I do want to invite everyone before you go next week. We're gonna switch gears and interview brilliant, accomplished artist Mike Henderson. He's an East Bay artist that has been painting extraordinary work about social justice. And in the culture that he has experienced in California in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. So please join us for that. That's Wednesday, February 8th. That's Wednesday, February 15th. I lied. Next week, February 8th, is Desert Biker Bars. Hold on, we're sticking with the theme. Biker Bars of the Desert. Join us here February 8th, 12:30. We'll send you links to all of this. Again, Chris Colin, you are fascinating. Thank you so much for bringing your knowledge and enthusiasm to Alta Live.
Thanks, Beth. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Safe travels.